Kayla Flatter. In today's society, divorce is very prevalent and is statistically impacting around 40 to 50% of the families in the United States. As you can see from this graph, the United States is third, well, tied with, I'm not sure how to say that, with the highest divorce rates. I'm a part of this disappointingly high percentage of millennials whose parents are separated. I know firsthand how hard it can be to witness your parents fighting. The fights seem to last forever, and as a child you feel hopeless. Although my parents separated when I was very young, making it easier for me to adapt, I still reaped many of the consequences that follow with divorce. Divorce has a multitude of drastic impacts on the children who are involved. It inflicts trauma in the areas of mental health, environment, and will unquestionably alter the children's future in a negative way. Divorce takes an extreme toll on children and families' emotional stability. In many divorce cases, the parents are separated because they can no longer come to agreements for the issues they were having. The moments leading up to divorce are often composed of many recurring arguments. While living in the same household still, it's very hard to hide these disagreements from the child. In extreme situations, the child could be witnessing verbal abuse or physical abuse. A side effect of this behavior that is usually more apparent in younger children is self-blame. Oftentimes, the child feels as if they're the root cause of their parents arguing, and this can lead to mental health issues such as depression or anxiety. Oftentimes in these arguments, parents will attempt to degrade the other parent in front of the child in hopes to get the child to pick sides. My close friend's parents got divorced about 2 years ago. His mother was very open with what was happening in the divorce, and they rightfully took their mother's side after figuring out their father had an affair with another woman. Ashamed of himself, his father started drinking alcohol as a coping mechanism, and this really just made the situation for them so much worse. His relationship with his children became almost obsolete, and he lost custody of his children. It was just a really big mess, and I watched this really greatly impact my friend's senior year of high school. His grades suffered and his attendance, and the divorce just really emotionally impacted his entire family, and they're still not the same, and they're recovering from this. But divorce not only emotionally impacts the child, but also inhibits the environmental stability. Depending on the severity of a divorce, a court ruling determines the amount of parental custody that is granted, and financial positions may change for the worse. Luckily, in my case, my parents, we had a joint custody agreement, which ended up being better for me because it was easier to switch from seeing my parents, In our agreement, my mother had me during the school week, and my father had me on the weekends and all of summer. At first, this was really hard for me to become accustomed to because I went to school where my mom lived, and then my dad lived somewhere different. So in my summers, I didn't really have a social life because I didn't know anybody where my dad lived. And I was constantly going back and forth, and I'd want to go to my mom's, but I had to follow the schedule so strictly, and I wanted to be with friends because I was a child still, and it was just really hard for me. And also, holidays and birthdays were really hard because I was unable to celebrate with both of my parents now. I just had to pick one, and they usually switched off. And also, the act of legal separation itself is very expensive. According to Craig Allen, the average cost of divorce can range between $1,500 for an uncontested divorce and over $15,000 for a contested divorce. This can be a very significant setback for a family alone. However, in most cases, one parent is now forced to move out of the house, yet producing another financial hurdle that they must overcome. It also takes a lot of time to become adjusted to living on a single salary, especially if one parent was the sole provider for the family prior to that. Although these impacts mainly affect the parent, the child is indirectly affected by them because there may be food insecurity in the family now. There's a lack of funds for recreational use, and there's few opportunities to blend in socially because the child may start having to wear cheaper clothes, and they won't be able to go do as much, go to the movies with their friends as much, stuff like that. And this period of transition has a long-term adverse effects on the child. Because I've seen divorce in nearly everyone I'm close to's life, I can only name one of my friends whose parents are still together, and every single person in my family has been divorced, unfortunately. Because of this, I have witnessed firsthand the impacts that it produces that will last a lifetime. My senior year of high school, I had an internship at elementary school as a student helper. I went every day there, and I formed a really close relationship with the first grade class, with the first grade students I assisted with. Towards the middle of the school year, one of the students' parents had gotten divorced. Prior to the divorce, this student was exhibiting excellent behavior. He was they were even considering putting him above his grade level, he was going to move up to the next grade level and skip a grade. But as soon as this divorce happened, his behavior he started having issues in class, and his grades were going down, and this really just showed me the effect that it can have on a child's education in the middle of the school year. That was a really hard switch for him. Each of their parents raise their child differently according to their own personal morals, and the way the child is raised will ultimately shape the child into who they become. In joint custody cases like my own, the child has to please two different sets of parents now, and this can be very conflicting and emotionally draining when discovering who you are. Because my parents have two different parenting styles, my mother has very high standards for my grades, but she has a lot of trust in what I do, with my free time, so she doesn't really care where I am or when I don't have a curfew. But my father, he parented me with more of a firm hand. He was really focused on punctuality, and he was worried about who I was hanging out with, where I was, and if I didn't come home by curfew, I'd be in a lot of trouble. So, but I know my parents really cared about me, but the frustrations with our situation took a toll on my long-term mental health and my social life. I feel that there was always an unattainable standard that I can't reach, even in my young adulthood, because I was trying to please both of them, but they both had two different expectations for me. With divorce being so prevalent in families, it has become a norm. At a young age, you are still developing a sense of right and wrong, and divorced families have set a terrible example for what a marriage should consist of. As the child grows up, they will now have a false ideology of what a healthy relationship should look like, and they're more likely to possess similar habits to their parents. There may be a presence of trust issues, commitment issues, and lack of hope for love in general. So prior to committing to a lifetime with significant other and starting a family, one must consider if that choice is the right long-term decision. There are other little lives outside yourselves who will carry the burden of separation just as you may. At all costs, one should avoid putting a child through divorce. It causes extreme emotional trauma, inconsistency in their environment, and thus making a negative impact on the child's future in a multitude of ways. When you make the vow until death do us part, make sure you remember the significance of this promise, and for the sake of our future generations to come.
Question?
What's some advice you would personally give to someone whose parents are going through a divorce?
You really just have to make sure that, my friend, he was my ex-boyfriend, but we were really close. But when his parents were going through a divorce, I had to make sure that, he knew, his relationship with his dad was going downhill. But, the advice I gave him was to make sure you try to keep that relationship. Everybody makes mistakes, so it's just important to keep a relationship with both your parents, especially after there was a mistake, because things like that will happen.